Hello guys, today we are going to make the grid representative class. Let's start with creating the class. This class is going to be an actor class, and the name of this class is going to be grid representative. This class is going to have two components, a box component or box collider and a static mesh component. Let's start with creating these two components, but first I'm going to delete the tick component because we are not going to use it. Also make be can ever tick false because we are not using the tick function, and delete from here. I'm going to make a private section, and now here is going to be our static mesh component. Let's declare this component. It's going to be a pointer, and the name of this variable, this component, is going to be static mesh. Now let's use a uProperty specifier. This is going to be added anywhere because we want to edit this static mesh in Blueprint. And I'm going to use allow private access equals true in case we use this component in blueprints. And now I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to make the box component, and I'm going to call this box collider. Let's include this class box component. And now here in constructor we are going to create our components. There are two methods to create. The first one, which is inside these braces, it goes like this. First we have to include our box component library, which is in components box component.h, our header file. And now I'm going to put this below the B can ever tick. Box component, box collider is going to be equal to create a component in C++. We use a create default sub object. And our specifier is going to be box component, and we are going to give it a name, fname text, and this is our component's name. I'm going to call this static mesh. Now we have to make this component our root component, so we use a function which is set root component, and we have to attach a component which is in this case is our box collider. Now let's create our static mesh. Create default sub object static mesh component. Let's give it a name. Let's say this is static mesh. And now we have to attach this component to our root component. To do that, we get our static mesh component, and we use a function which is set up attachment. And here we define in which component we are going to attach our static mesh, which is in our root component. To get the root component, we write get root component. This is the first method to create our components. The second one is by using something called constructor initializer list. Here you can also initialize non-static constant variables. Also you can initialize reference variables, and this one is better for performance. Now to create here there's a slightly difference. We have to delete our equal and put our braces, and in the end of the braces let's put semicolon. Take this one, put it here. Let's delete the equal sign, delete this, and here. And this is the second method. Also remember that this is called a constructor initializer list. Let's compile our code. Now let's create the blueprint actor class for our grid representative C++ class. Let's go to our content folder. Let's create a new folder. I'm going to call this grid. Here I'm going to put our grid management into this folder. And here I'm going to create another blueprint class, which is going to be grid representative. I'm going to call this BP, grid representative. And now, as you can see, there's our box collider component and our static mesh component. Our static mesh component is going to be a plane, this one right here. And let's adjust our box extent. This is okay. In our static mesh component, I'm going to search for collision. And this static mesh component is going to have no collision. Instead of, our box collider is going to handle our collision. That's why we created the box collider component. Now let's search here collision. And this actor's collision presets is going to be custom. First of all, let's ignore all this object response and collision responses. Only, let's say, only visibility. Let's say that this component is going to block the visibility channel. Later on, we might change this collision response. Now, let's go to our grid management. Or no, you know what? Let's go to a BP blueprint grid management. And here, let's search for BP grid representative. Now, let's hit play. And nothing happens because we are in the wrong level. Let's go to our main map. And now, as you can see, our BP grid representative classes are spawned. Blueprint actors, I mean. Now, as you can see, there's no offset. We have to adjust that. We can go to our grid representative. Offset, let's say this 200. As you can see, there's an offset of 200. In C++ class, let's declare two functions. The first one is going to be void. Let's call this occupy grid. And the second one is going to be unoccupy grid. And we have to put these two in the public section. Now, our occupy grid, we are going to use this function whenever a building is placed to this particular grid. And we are going to use an occupy grid whenever the building that is placed in this grid, it gets destroyed. Now let's create the definition for our class. To do this, press Ctrl dot and create definition. Do the same one for an occupy grid, Ctrl dot, create definition. Now I'm going to put this to below our begin play function. And in our private section, I'm going to make a boolean, which I'm going to call this b is occupied. I'm going to initialize this to false. Now, in our occupy grid, if our grid is already occupied, which is b is occupied, then I'm going to return. And I'm going to print if this grid is already occupied, I'm going to print a message to the log to inform the Let's say that we have a designer to inform that the designer this grid is occupied. For example, to do that, we use UV log with underline log temp warning. I'm going to use a warning message, which is going to be our debug is going to be yellow, basically, text. And to print the name of this actor, we use percentage, and for strings, we use s. And I'm going to say that this actor is occupied. And now that we have s, we are going to put a comma, this multiply sign, and let's get our actor name or label. Now, our grid, if it's not occupied, we are going to occupy the grid, which is B is occupied is going to be true. And here, in unoccupied grid, B is occupied is going to be false. I'm going to copy and paste this. If our B is, if our grid is already unoccupied, we don't have need to, set back the B is occupied to false. And I'm going to say it is unoccupied. Now, in the next video, I'm going to make a material for our grid. And let's say that when this grid is occupied, our material's color is going to be black. And when the grid is unoccupied, our material's color is going to be blue, or let's say white. But we are going to do this in the next video. Now let's make a temporary function. Void. Let's call this change static mesh size. This function is going to have a parameter type of boolean. I'm going to call this is occupied. Let's create a definition. Put this all the way down below, right here. And now I'm going to make a float variable. I'm going to call this scale and initialize this to 1. And I'm going to use a ternary operator instead using an if statement. To use that, we open and close braces. Here we are going to type our condition, which is occupied. Is occupied. If it's occupied, we have to put our question mark in our when our grid is occupied, our scale value is going to be 2.f, and if it's not, our scale value is going to be 1f. The basically this ternary operator is like if statement. If it's occupied, do this. If it's not occupied, do this. Now here, let's get our static mesh and set our scale. To do that, we use the function set world scale 3D. And our scale is going to be a vector, which is a vector, f vector. And we are going to use, or can we do something like this? Scale? No. We have to make an f vector, scale, and use scale. This is basically our x axis is going to be 1 or 2, and same for y and z. Now we have to use this function. When we occupy the grid, we are going to change static mesh size, and our parameter is going to be B is occupied. B is occupied. And because this is true, our scale size is going to be 2. And here we are going to do the same thing. B is occupied. Here in this case is going to be false and our scale value is going to be 1. Let's compile our code and get back to the Unreal Engine. Let's go to the op level blueprint, and here we are going to change our grid static mesh size. Let's get the begin play node. From here I'm going to write get actors of class. This node finds all the actors, which is going to be BP representative, finds all the BP representative actors in the level. And I'm going to promote this to a variable. I'm going to call this grids. And now when we press 1 in keyboard, I'm going to get the grids. I'm going to loop. I'm going to use for each loop. And from an element, I'm going to occupy a grid. But I forgot to tell you that you have to add the macro function and add the specify blueprint callable. Let's get back to the Unreal Engine. Here, when we press 1, we are going to occupy grid. And when we press 2, get grids, loop through all of them. And for each element, I'm going to unoccupy. If I can type unoccupy. Let's go to our level. When I press play, as you can see, our grids are unoccupied and their scale size is 1. But when I press 1, their scale is going to be 2, as you can see. But when I press 1 again, not like this, when I press 1 again, as you can see, our debug says that BP grid representative is already occupied. When I press 2, they are going to be unoccupied, and if I press again, there's a message that all grids are unoccupied. Thank you for listening, guys. See you in the next video.